Hey, 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 hey. Hey, everybody. Testing, testing. One, two, three. Hi, everybody. This is Santita Jackson on the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. You can stream us on am950radio.com, but I need you to also go over to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Like and subscribe there. Like and subscribe there, please. And then go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page. That's the only place where I can accept new friends. Please become my friend there. And then, of course, I am on X at Santita J, at Santita J. So please get on over there. I want you to be my friend. And we have got a lot to talk about, a lot to talk about. We'll be talking really continuing to look at what the Democrats did and did not do in the next hour with Norman Solomon of Roots Action and Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. But I've got a guy, I've been trying to get him back on the show. I'm so excited that he's here. One of my favorite people indeed, from antiwar.com, their news editor, Dave DeCamp. And I am so glad that you are with us today because we have got a lot to unpack. A week away from the Trump victory. And of course, I invite people to go to your podcast, Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp. Go on and give him your support. Some of the best reporting on war and peace you will find on antiwar.com. And it is really transpartisan because you will find Democrats and Republicans who support war, Democrats and Republicans and independents who don't support it. And at some point where we can find common cause with each other to stop these wars and to really do what Dr. King, Dave DeCamp, really, he warned us almost 60 years ago that if we continue to fund wars and not fund programs of social uplift, defeat hunger, provide decent housing for people, provide education and the right education for people, academic and vocational, helping people to become all that they're supposed to be, that we would be approaching spiritual death. And so here we are today. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about, now President-elect Trump. I mean, this is something really rare. A president who lost re-election and then is voted in, I guess, 4 years later. Wow. It's quite an accomplishment. And it's really got a lot of people very upset. My mother did say, moving into this election, she said, now you make sure you do not get too wound up about this. I said, well, why is that? She said, because half the country is going to be very upset and very angry with the results, no matter what. And that is what we're seeing. And so what we want to do today is to really kind of take apart some of the picks, some of the choices that President-elect Trump has made. Has he held to the promises, the seeming promises? Well, what we thought he might be doing, he said that he wanted to end these wars, and yet he's now surrounded by hawks. He said that he would end the conflict in the Middle East as quickly as possible, even though he said, for public relations purposes, of course. But he's got people who might extend it. A lot of people are very confused by his choices. Indeed, many people are saying that for all of his talk about wanting to end peace, he might be ending peace, but wanting to start the peace. Indeed, that was his primary criticism of Liz Cheney. What he's doing is not that. So let's talk about it right here on the Santita Jackson Show. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Hey, Janae, please thumbs up. And we want you to weigh in on these choices because he has moved all the way into the war column. And Dave DeCamp, I want you to talk about it. I want us to look at some of these choices that he's made, just broadly speaking. Give us some, we've got Marco Rubio, we've got Congresswoman Stefanik, we've got $100 million from Marian Adelson, who is a staunch supporter of Israel, and that is her right. That having been said, she's not a staunch supporter of Palestinian rights, and that's really on the table now. Many people feel that had a tremendous impact upon this election. So let me just start with you. Are you surprised? Who are the people, just generally speaking, who has he chosen? And is it surprising to you?
Well, he's picked basically all extremely hawkish people so far. And there was some hope that, he might fulfill some of his promises, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. He's talking about negotiating a deal. He says things like he wants the killing to stop in Ukraine. And when he picked JD Vance to be his running mate, I thought that was a good sign that, he was serious about that, because Vance, he's hawkish on China. He's very pro-Israel, but he made it kind of his thing when he came into the Senate to question U.S. involvement in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But the way he's filling out this cabinet really isn't looking good. I mean, Mike Waltz, the Republican congressman from Florida, who he named as his national security advisor, he was one of the only members of Congress that I saw, and I remember because I wrote a story about it for antiwar.com. This was back in 2022. He was saying that the U.S. should send military advisors to Ukraine, contractors, and also, to help with intelligence. He really wanted to ramp up U.S. involvement in that war, despite all the risks of provoking a direct war with Russia. Recently his rhetoric has been a little better, but that's because I think Republicans realize that their base overall was against all this spending on this war in Ukraine. I mean, even Marco Rubio has said some things about how it's not sustainable or something. And Marco Rubio has never seen a war that he doesn't like. I mean, the Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, I think, is one of the worst signs, because putting someone like him in that position, again, I mean, he supported all the wars the U.S. has been involved in over the past few decades. And one thing I always remember, well, actually, I forgot about it for a little while. Sam Husseini reminded me of it in one of his recent articles.
Mm-hmm.
In 2019, when the U.S. was trying to overthrow Maduro in Venezuela, Marco Rubio tweeted a picture of Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, who was taken out by the U.S. and NATO and brutally murdered on the side of the road.
Yeah.
So that's who he made Secretary of State, someone who makes threats like that. So that's really not a good sign. That's who he wants to negotiate with Russia. I mean, that's that again, bad sign.
Well, I mean, and China. I mean, please help me with this, because you and I were talking just before we came on the air, and I was reading, and I said, wait. I had to go back. Google, thank you for being a dear friend. I said, he's been barred from China. Would you explain?
Mm-hmm.
What, how is he going to be the U.S. ambassador? I mean, how is he going to, not U.S. ambassador, the Secretary of State? He's hawkish on, on Iran. He's hawkish on China. He can't go to China. Hey, Miss Rose Liuzzo, sending you so much love. That's Viola Liuzzo's daughter, sending her so much love today. Sending you so much love. But help me to understand. Hey, Andre. Hey, Janae. Hey, Mike. How can you be Secretary of State, but you can't go to China? How does it work?
Well, it's a consequence of what the U.S., because China in recent years, they started sanctioning U.S. officials and U.S. companies in response to U.S. sanctions.
Okay.
And recently, China had a defense minister, Li Shangfu, who was under U.S. sanctions. He was sanctioned when he was in a lower level position. He was made the defense minister, and the U.S. refused to lift the sanctions on him. And so China said, all right, well, we're not going to talk. The defense minister is not going to meet with your defense minister. There was some kind of, I think he was involved in some kind of scandal. So he got removed from his position. So now there is a defense minister who's not under U.S. sanctions. But, this is a problem. And again, it's the Secretary of State. I know Victoria Nuland was under Russian sanctions. And when she was put into the Biden administration, Russia actually removed them so she could go over there. That's who they sent over there. This was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They sent Victoria Nuland over there. But yeah, no, it's definitely a big problem. And China, when we talk about China, the attitude about China, especially among Republicans, it's pretty bad among Democrats too. But, if you ever watch any of these Senate hearings, these congressional hearings about China, I mean, it's just like a completely hysterical, it's just they're saying China's the biggest threat that the U.S. has ever faced ever, and Marco Rubio is one of the biggest China hawks, and so is Waltz is a big China hawk. Ratcliffe, who Trump named as head of CIA, is a big China hawk. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they just say, hey, he can't go to China. Well, we're not going to send him to China because we don't even want to talk to China.
Well, how can he get around? Well, arguably the fastest growing economy in the world. Um, by some metrics, their economy is stronger than ours and bigger. How are you? And BRICS is growing every day. I mean, I've talked to some economists and they've said, well, we're not worried about BRICS. I'm like, I think you ought to be. I'm not saying you ought to be worried, but don't act like they're not there. When you go to Africa, they're all over. When you go to different parts of the world, they're cutting deals, Dave DeCamp. And I'm just wondering if it seems like we're getting further and further and further behind. We're out of step with the world. Am I wrong here?
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at just over the past year, everything in Gaza with Israel, all the UN votes, the UN General Assembly votes really have shown how the U.S. is out of step with the rest of the world over its support for Israel. And there's also, they do the annual vote at the UN General Assembly about the U.S. embargo on Cuba, and it's always just the U.S. and Israel that vote against it. They did that again recently, and I think that really shows, the kind of the difference in the way the U.S. and China operates. The U.S. goes around trying to dictate what certain countries do, and China goes around looking to do business, and they have a policy of non-interference in their internal affairs. So what is going to be more appealing if you're a developing country in Africa or something? With BRICS, I think the U.S. definitely has to worry about this economic alternative. I think people talk about de-dollarization. That's definitely a threat. I think it'll take a long time. Like, we're still a long way from there, but it's gonna definitely hurt the dollar. And this is just a natural consequence of the U.S. using economic sanctions like all over the world. It's like something like a third of the countries in the world are under U.S. sanctions. And this is something recently Trump did this interview with Bloomberg where he was kind of talking about this and saying that he might rely on sanctions less. Because if you look at the past few administrations, like the Obama administration sanctioned more countries than any administration before. And then Trump came in and blew that record out of the water. And then Biden came in and issued even more sanctions than Trump. So it's just like, this is just something they constantly go to. If there's an election in some country and they don't like the results, we'll sanction some people. I mean, it's really kind of imperial hubris, I think, that they can just kind of bully and pressure countries. But again, there is this alternative economic system really springing up. So again, Trump sounded like he was aware of this, but then again, you look at his cabinet picks.
Well, help me to understand that, because it seems that, many, even some progressives said, I don't like him, don't like his policies, but at least he's trying to avoid war. That was really, I think it was Christian Peretti wrote about that and took a lot of heat for it. But some people did say, well, it's not because I said, you know what? The record is clear. That having been said, he has moved all the way to the Hawks. What do you think that is about? And then I want to go through like Stefanik, Rubio, the Secretary of Defense, who has no management experience.
Oh yeah,
he's a veteran. Why do you think he's taking this turn to them? And let's just look at some of these individuals.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's tough to say why. On the campaign trail, he kind of said everything that people wanted to hear. There were a lot of people on our side, antiwar.com, friends of ours, libertarians I know, who were arguing to vote for Trump because he would be less bad when it comes to foreign policy than Harris. And I still think there might be an argument for that. We'll see what he actually does. But yeah, the cabinet picks are not showing us that it's going to be good. But I mean, if you just look like the state of things right now with Gaza and Ukraine, I mean, it is,
help us to understand the state in Gaza, because Israel's finance minister said this Trump victory has given us license to annex the West Bank. What was that about? Smotrich?
Yeah, that's Smotrich. He's the Israeli finance minister. He's also basically the Israeli occupation governor of the West Bank. He has this other position in the defense ministry that gives him the power to expand the settlements. But yeah, he's celebrating the Trump victory because when Trump was in office, he was the most pro-Israel president basically of all time. And again, Biden came in and gave Israel more than Trump ever did just by numbers of military aid. But Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, recognized the Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights. They declared that the settlements in the West Bank are not illegal under international law. And so, he was a friend of these extremist settlers. And now, I mean, one of his worst appointments is his ambassador to Israel. He named Mike Huckabee as the ambassador to Israel, who is former Arkansas governor. I know he ran for president back in the day.
Baptist minister.
Yeah, but he is stridently pro-Israeli annexation of the West Bank. He said before that he doesn't think Palestinians even exist, that they're just like a made-up
there
people.
is no such thing as a Palestinian.
Mm-hmm.
How do you wait? I can't go past that. Not that you're going past it, you're not. But I want to know. See, we're only 4.5% of the world's population, right? It is 95% of the world are standing against us at the United Nations with respect to Gaza and the West Bank. We're outliers here, and it is really, we're being harmed internationally, I think. So how do we, of what use is Mike Huckabee to American interests internationally when he declares that there is no such thing as a Palestinian, and he is strident about that? He has not moved. I mean, he's amplifying it. People have asked him to explain it, and he said, I said what I said. I didn't stutter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he during the last Trump administration, there's this video that's been going around of him visiting a settlement in the West Bank, saying there's no such thing as the West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. There's no such thing as the occupation. Israel has the right to this land. That's his view. I actually just wrote a quick story because he did his first interview with Israeli media today, and he said, he was asked, do you think it'll be possible for Israel to annex the West Bank under a Trump administration? And he said, of course. Look at Trump's record. So, yeah, that's a really bad sign. And you see Trump's press release about it. He says, he's going to negotiate peace in the Middle East. It's just like a guy who doesn't think one side of the conflict exists is going to be the one to negotiate peace. I mean, it's just completely absurd. And it is a religious, he's a Zionist Christian, an evangelical who has this belief that God gave this land to the modern state of Israel. I'm a Christian myself, but there's, this is a whole can of worms, but there's no theological reason for me to support the modern state of Israel. But this is a strain of Christianity that has a lot of influence here in the U.S. and in U.S. politics. And that's what a lot of this is about. I mean, that's Mike Pompeo. That's Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. They have this end times, idea that they have to do this in Israel and the third temple needs to be built. And that is kind of what's driving a lot of this policy in the U.S. So it's just a really bad sign, I think, for that, because, they've been clear that they want to do what they're doing in Gaza to the West Bank. I don't know where those Palestinians are going to go in the West Bank, but they're going to try, I think, really ramp up military operations in the West Bank. I mean, they already have. If this was happening independently of what's happened in Gaza, all the news would be about the West Bank, all the violence that's happened. I mean, it's been more violence than like the intifadas, I think. Maybe not quite, but there's been a lot of just really, they ramped up the attacks there.
We're talking with Dave DeCamp, news editor of antiwar.com, about President-elect his picks for his cabinet, his top picks for his presidency. And many people are surprised that the picks are hawks, war hawks. This is someone who said President-elect Trump said, "Look, what I'm trying to do, I don't want any more wars." That's why he was really what strung up and quartered about his comments about Liz Cheney. And when he actually said, "Look, if he said she's a chicken hawk. What she wants to do is get out here and fight a war that she won't fight. She wants other people to fight wars that she won't fight herself. How would she like it if she were put on the front line?" It's really ugly. That having been said, you have one has to wonder. Let's look at Marco Rubio. How, as Secretary of State, can he function? Given the fact that he thinks that there is a Palestinian, that the whole of the Palestinian people are hiding Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
He pretty much said that, and so we've got to eliminate Hamas. And this is one of the most precise militaries in the world. They know how to make surgical strikes, but they killed. I mean, according to the Lancet study, and many other other organizations that measure mortality in war, more than 200,000 people have been killed. Dave DeCamp. I mean, this is not something insignificant. And many are calling this an ethnic cleansing. How influential can the United States be in this conflict, and consequently in other conflicts in other places around the world, if you have a Marco Rubio who, I mean, because we're losing a lot of capital, the United States is, because of our stance in the Middle East internationally. Yes?
Yes, absolutely.
So
I mean,
how can he help me? Because I'm trying to figure out how this shakes out, because it doesn't just, we continue to look at Gaza and the West Bank, and we should, but we've got Taiwan, we've got North and South Korea, we've got India, we've got all over the world. People are looking at us, and we're losing influence.
Well, Antony Blinken, Biden's Secretary of State, I think has got to be the worst Secretary of State of all that's ever.
Why would you say that?
Because I mean, you look at the first 2 years, 3 years of the administration when it comes to Ukraine, just all the rhetoric about human rights, about the rules-based order, about all this stuff, and then look at what he's supported in Gaza for the past year. I mean, the hypocrisy, I think that really damages the U.S.'s global standing, is just the hypocrisy. It's like too much at this point. I mean, you look at some of the things they tried to get the ICC to go after Putin, and then they opposed the ICC against Israel, against Netanyahu. And again, just the rhetoric, the rules-based international order. I mean, where has that gone in the past year? What has happened? And they actually implemented all, these new policies at the State Department that if we get a report that one of our partners is using our weapons and they kill civilians, we have to look into it and take action right away. They've gotten 500 of these reports and they haven't done anything about it. I think that really shows, again, just the hypocrisy. And so in a way, Marco Rubio, he's going to be more like Mike Pompeo. When Mike Pompeo was Secretary of State, there was no idea that he was some human rights defender, even though Pompeo did try to, do these things, accuse China of genocide and everything. We'll see that from Rubio. He's going to be using some of that same rhetoric against China and Russia, but there's also just no secret. I mean, he's a war hawk. Blinken is too, but he's kind of, he tries to dress things up in humanitarianism. So, I mean, in a way, I don't think he will be much worse than Blinken. If that's any consolation, I don't know.
It's not consolation. What about talk to me about Congresswoman Stefanik. And of course, many of us remember her being really the lead congressperson in these hearings with the university presidents. We lost, I guess, the first Black president of Harvard, Dr. Claudine Gay, the president of UPenn, yes?
Yeah, I think it was UPenn. I can't remember exactly. I know Claudine Gay. That's the only one I remember by name.
Columbia University, that president ended up having to leave. She was under fire. I mean, Whew. And of course, she was awarded and rewarded handsomely by Miriam Adelson with a huge award. And I guess she got a reward in becoming the UN ambassador. How is that going to work? I
I
mean,
mean,
Netanyahu just spoke at the United Nations, and the whole body walked out.
mm,
I mean, the United States was left, Israel was left sitting in their seats, and I think maybe one of the micro islands, and that was about it. Everybody, people stood up and walked out when he went to the lectern to speak.
yeah, she is not. She's bad news. She took a trip to Israel recently, a few months ago, and she gave a speech to the Knesset, their parliament. And she bashed Biden, saying that there's no excuse for any president to withhold any military aid to Israel at all. And this was when everybody was angry because Biden apparently paused one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs, even though he's given them more weapons than any other president before. It was just a PR stunt. But so she goes over there to bash him for that. And then she also mentions her hearing, saying that she led the charge to expose the anti-Semitic rot at the American universities, even though many of these students who were protesting were Jewish, a lot of them were led by Jewish groups. I remember they were doing Passover Seders at these Gaza encampments. I mean, it's just a complete joke. And this is one thing that all these Republicans, and this is something Trump was talking about, cracking down on these protesters and everything. So it's something to look out for. But yeah, this is her reward for doing all that, basically on behalf of a foreign country. I think I saw Max Blumenthal say, this is Trump's gift to Miriam Adelson, is that the UN is getting a second ambassador, Israeli ambassador, because she's essentially going to act as the another ambassador for Israel at the UN.
Well, given the shifting mood in the United States, certainly Americans are questioning our Middle East policy in ways that we've not really done in more than 50 years, I would say. And it's getting louder. It's becoming more insistent. How will her, and many Americans are asking, whose side are you on? How will that play in the United States before we can get out to the rest of the world? Because she's first our ambassador, the American ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. How will that play?
Well, I mean, again, like with the protests and everything, I mean, there's been some members of Congress saying that the protesters should be sent to Gaza. There was actually a bill introduced in the House. I forget the guy's name. I actually think we might have talked about it.
Yes.
That said the protesters should be sent to Gaza. And what's the implication there? That they should go be killed, basically. Yes. So I think when it comes domestically, we might see kind of a big crackdown. We've seen all this pro-Israel legislation trying to control speech, trying to label Zionism as anti-Semitism, criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. There's this bill to take away a nonprofit status if they're deemed supporters of terrorist groups, and who's the one defining that. So I think that's something we have to look out for with this Republican. I mean, they're going to be in control of the Senate, the House. Stefanik is going to be at the UN. I'm sure she's going to have some influence on this stuff too. But there might be a pretty serious crackdown in this kind of on the criticisms of Israel and stuff online. I think is something we have to worry about.
We're talking with Dave DeCamp, news editor of antiwar.com. And of course, you've got to tune into his podcast, Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp. Please support his program. You get a lot of great information because, after all, how much of our budget goes to the military?
How much right now of our budget?
I mean, really, really, truly.
It's tough to say now because there's been so much like additional stuff that they've been adding, but it's been about half of the budget for a long time now. But it is tough to track. I haven't like sat down and
Well,
looked
not
at.
even the numbers. Just I think just it's staggering to think.
Yeah.
When I mean, because Americans, I mean, part of the reason they say that Vice President Harris lost is because of pocketbook issues.
Mhm.
That people. I just heard this newly elected Senate leadership, Republican leadership, say the woman in leadership, I forget her name, she stepped forward. She said, "Look, this is why we won: pocketbook issues. People going to the grocery stores and they cannot afford their groceries." And you've got to Willie Brown, who mentored uh, Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, said, "Look, you're talking about the middle class. That is not the issue. The issue is groceries. The issue is rent. The issue is making it from payday to Monday. That's the issue." So, I mean, how can we justify um, this military budget, which about half of our money goes to the military, which means it's really going to military industrial contractors, right? I mean, Dave, what is going on here?
I mean, I think, and I actually heard from people who voted for Trump who never voted for him before.
Mhm.
And, foreign policy usually isn't, in war, usually isn't really a big issue for people when it comes to voting. But I feel like I heard a lot of people say it was because of what he was saying about the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
Because, and I remember at the time in 2022 when gas prices were really high and groceries were really expensive, and seeing Biden announcing, I remember I pumped gas into my car and I was like, man, that was expensive. And I went into the gas station to get something and it was way more expensive than it used to be. And on the TV, Biden was announcing new sanctions on Russia, and it's like on Russian oil. It's like, oh, well, that's just going to make things go up more. And so on top of that, they're sending all this money to Ukraine. And I think in the beginning of the war, a lot of Americans supported it because they just kind of bought the narrative and it seemed like the right thing to do. But as time goes on, you get used to there being a war there, and you see all this money. They're just dumping all this money. They're passing these emergency spending packages to keep funding these wars while your prices go up. So then you have Trump saying he's going to end the war and saying he's going to, end taxes on tips and things like that.
Mhm.
And Harris just didn't, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but when it comes to this stuff, I think, again, the Ukraine war, I think to people, it's just not a priority to keep funding this thing when there's it's clear Ukraine's not going to win. They're just dragging it out. So I
They
think that
lost
probably
they lost hundreds of thousands of people. I mean,
yeah.
it's just it's a lose lose. And I'm just seeing breaking news: Matt Gaetz was just chosen as the Attorney General.
Oh, wow. It's kind of
I,
interesting.
I can't make heads or tails of this. It's just all of these people.
That's for Attorney General.
For Attorney General, you, hey, look, I'm just all across my screen. I'm watching, John Thune, who is a renowned globalist. Okay, he's going to take Mitch McConnell's place as majority leader. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what are we looking at, and particularly as it with regards to matters of war and peace, because so much of our budget, so much of our monies go to war, when Americans are really saying that we need so much at home. I mean, I feel like this predates you and I. This was the argument that they had during Vietnam. That the war on poverty had to be thrown out the window. And heaven knows we still have. I mean, and now, I mean, poverty is on the rise all across the United States of America. And so I'm trying to find out. I mean, it's President Trump said, candidate Trump said that he didn't want any more wars. And yet everybody he's nominating, absolutely, that's all that they want. What are we to read into that?
Well, Matt Gaetz is pretty good on war compared to other members of Congress, but he's going to be
Attorney General.
So yeah, that doesn't matter. And I just saw Tulsi Gabbard is going to be the director of national intelligence, which is kind of like she's I've been critical of her for her stance on like the war on terror, but
Mm-hmm.
overall she's good on Ukraine and some other things like foreign policy related. But what
Mm-hmm.
is she going to do as the DNI?
I,
I
I
don't really
don't
know.
I don't understand that.
Like if she was Secretary of Defense, I would say, all right, that could be good.
She's a veteran, and
Yeah.
I mean, and she understands. I because do you help me to understand the pick for Department of Defense? Because
I'm
this is
trying
a
to
this
figure that one out.
okay. He's a
So,
congressman, right? He's a veteran, but he has
well,
one. No,
no, he's not a congressman. He's
he's
a
not a
Fox
congressman,
News host.
and he has no administrative
Mm.
experience.
He's so
So excuse me, I did misspeak. He's not a congressman. He's a veteran.
mm,
He's one of my former colleagues from Fox News. He's a pundit.
yeah. Yeah, so there's one reason why he might be better than say Mike Pompeo. Now if you look at his punditry, because that's what I was doing last night, I mean that's his only record. He doesn't have any record in office that you can judge him by. His punditry, he said all the horrible things you would imagine a Fox News host to say about Israel, about Iran, about China, about it, all of it. The one positive silver lining I saw is that he at one point endorsed the Defend the Guard Act. If you know what that is, this is Defend the Guard. It's kind of a nationwide movement led by veterans
Mm-hmm.
to introduce this legislation into the state. It's state level legislation, and if it gets passed, then the federal government cannot deploy that state's National Guard to a conflict zone where Congress hasn't declared war, and that hasn't happened since World War II. So it's actually a really good way to take the war-making powers away from the federal government. So he said at one point that he liked that. He's endorsed that. But again, I don't know. All everything else I've seen of him has been really bad. The only other potential silver lining is that he would not ever have a shot at a position like this if not for Trump. So if Trump does decide to pull troops out of somewhere, and I think he's going to be loyal to Trump, I don't think he's going to try to sabotage those plans like a Marco Rubio is going to try to do.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's good. But again, I mean, he just kind of seems, I mean, I've just seen these speeches he's given to these in Israel and like the stuff he says about Israel. Same thing as, I'm blanking on his name. We were just talking about him, the Trump's ambassador to Israel.
Oh my goodness, Huckabee.
Yeah, that's right. Huckabee.
Right.
I mean, kind of along the same line that God gave, Israel to the modern state that we see. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons to think he's just going to be a disaster. But
people can surprise you, but I think what is we have a widening war in the Middle East, and various factions have nuclear capabilities. We've heard threats about nuclear war with Ukrainian conflict with Russia. I mean, there's a lot that's on the line, and a lot of credible militarists, if you will, are saying, look, we are creeping precipitously close, Putin has said it, to World War III. I mean, what do we want? And it seems like we're closer to that. I'd like to be surprised. But no one is talking peace. Everyone is talking war. And that's very unsettling to me because it seems that Americans are not in the mood for war. Save the camp. More and more Americans are losing the taste for it. Am I incorrect?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I mentioned that Defend the Guard, these guys that we know that we try to help them get the word out about that. They're all veterans. I know a lot of veterans, and a lot of them are against war. They're against, so I think that's significant. And I think if you get those kind of guys, if you get a guy like the new Secretary of Defense, if you get that kind of guy, that kind of American, very patriotic guy to be against war, then I think we have a real chance of ending war. You kind of need the conservatives, the ones who are going to sign up to go fight the wars, to oppose the wars. And I think that is a good sign, just overall the way that the country has gone in the view of war. But we are at such a dangerous time. It's like, you know, this attitude, it might affect things down the line more. But right now, there's just such an immediate risk of. You mentioned the Middle East. I mean, Israel has nuclear weapons. Would anybody be surprised if Israel uses a nuke? All the things that they've done over the past year.
Well, they've done like the equivalent of the nuke with all of the bombs that they have dropped.
Yeah.
I mean, the place has been. Some people have said they wanted to make it a parking lot. Well, they've really done that with Gaza.
Yeah.
And yet, and more people around the world, America is at cross purposes with the world, and we cannot afford that. I mean, thank God we've got two oceans that on either side. But I,
Yeah, and that's the benefit of living in the United States is we don't need to be involved in these wars, but we're
but
involved in all of
but
them.
more and more of them are promising that if you don't stop these wars, they will be visited upon your shores. Increasingly, more people around the world are saying that to us, Dave DeCamp, and I think we would be foolish to ignore that.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, when we talk about World War III, like what that would actually look like between the U.S. and Russia and China,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it would reach us here because of the different technology and things, and how the U.S. is openly planning right now for a war with China in the future. And it's not like Ukraine; they're talking about like a direct war with China over Taiwan. And some of the plans when it comes to the technology stuff is like the stuff of nightmares. In Ukraine and in Russia, we've seen a lot of use of these small drones, these like kamikaze drones that they're small and they basically fly at their target and then blow up. The U.S. has this idea of taking those. So this is a plan, and they're openly talking about this. If China invades Taiwan or attacks Taiwan, they want to create, they call it a hellscape of these little drones, like just thousands and thousands of them to launch at China in the sky, to like cover the sky in these little drones, and also drone boats. So, again, these small, cheap drones, like I think of a big World War III, we're going to see kind of these little weapons like this that, these things I think could reach the U.S. And then, of course, there's also the risk of nuclear war, these hypersonic missiles that can hit their targets so quick that, yeah, I think World War III is definitely going to affect us here.
What about cyber warfare? I mean, because we keep thinking about boots on the ground, but first of all, we've got a 100-year-old infrastructure. When you leave the United States, you see just how advanced many other countries are. And we're talking, this is cyber. We're using the cyberspace to conduct this interview. I think we're much more vulnerable, right?
Yeah, I mean, attacks on the power grids and those things would really disrupt society, and that can be done through cyber. I mean, the U.S. has like shut down power grids in Venezuela, using cyber attacks. And we see all this kind of fear mongering about this. This was something I remember Rachel Maddow talking about, like Russia hacking into our infrastructure and shutting it down. And at the time, it's just not, why would Russia do that? But if it turns into World War III, then yeah, they're going to, they're all going to try to do things like that. We're going to try to do that to them. They're going to try to do it to us. So,
but I need you to explain to me before I ask you about Iran, because I know time is drawing short. But why the focus on Russia? What threat in particular do they pose to the United States?
Well, they don't pose any threat to us, to the United States. They just pose a threat to kind of this hegemony that the U.S. wants to have over that. The U.S. foreign policy establishment, the neocons, they want to control the world, and Russia poses a threat to that control in Eastern Europe. I mean, I really think that that's it. And they also intervened in Syria to stop the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad. I think that was another big reason why they became, the enemy. I mean, I think that's really all it is. I mean, this idea that this idea, and it's also money. They're making such big money making China the enemy. NATO's whole reason for existence is based on Russia being a threat. So they have to make sure Russia is a threat. I mean, Jens Stoltenberg, who he recently stepped down as the head of NATO,
Yeah.
he said something like, "Oh, the invasion of Ukraine has been great for NATO because NATO's expanding. They're all spending more on their military. It's just,
But is this smart? I mean, in a world in which now the BRICS nations, the global South they're rising and they will be the superpower. I mean, the next century is supposed to be the African century. I often said at the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, war, because that's a real war. What we have over in Gaza is not a war. These are not two armies that are opposing each other. This is something else. I said, first of all, Africa is not going to support the United States on this. They're going to support Russia. They have business relationships with Russia, and African leaders will tell you they didn't colonize us. So they have a fundamentally different relationship with China because it's a utilitarian relationship. They're like, the Chinese are proficient at this, we have that. They feel that they have relationships that are mutually beneficial and mutually respectful. India, the same. I mean, the world is changing, Dave. And I feel like we are stuck, but we're stuck to our detriment. The world is leaving us behind, and we are making a lot of 19th century colonial, we have a 19th century colonial mindset. And I just don't think it accrues to our benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. You asked earlier if it was smart, and yeah, I would say no.
I mean, help me. What about Iran? Because you've been writing about that. I love everyone, his podcast, Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp. You've got to listen to it. And, I listen because not a lot of people are talking anti-war talk. You're not having that discussion. Where are we with Iran? And what is going on? Help me to understand, where do you see this going?
Well, the big risk now is, Israel recently launched airstrikes in Iran. That came after Iran launched some missiles at Israel, and they got past their air defenses. I think that they showed that their ballistic missiles could get past the Israeli air defenses. And, the important context is that Iran did that in response to a lot of Israeli escalations in the region. You mentioned before how Israel can be precise if they want to. They were able to plant a bomb in a house in Tehran that was guarded by the Iranian military and killed Hamas's political leader. That was one of the reasons why Iran launched that attack. So Iran, it seems like it's kind of cooled down in the past few days. I think the Iranians probably wanted to see how the election went here in the U.S., but they're saying that they're going to respond, and the U.S. is saying that they're going to defend Israel like they did during the other attacks. The U.S. directly intervened to intercept some missiles. So
with this new administration, where could that go? I mean, now mind you, we're 2 months out from that. But
so he's putting in a lot of people who might say, okay, let's hit Iran, let's bomb Iran, let's just do it. Let's finally do it. They've been wanting to a war with Iran for a long time. When we talk about war with Iran, I don't see any like a U.S. invasion of Iran ever happening. I mean, that's just not realistic. Iran is huge. But I could see the U.S. launching some airstrikes. And the thing is, I mean, I think it would still take a little while to get there. It all kind of depends on, I think this transition period is actually the most dangerous time because Israel, they kind of time things, especially Netanyahu, with the state of the political situation in the U.S. And there's been these reports that Israel's thinking about bombing Iran's nuclear sites. So it looks like they might try to start something with Iran in the next 2 months. And they know that the U.S. is going to bail them out. They basically want to provoke a war between the U.S. and Iran.
Why?
Because if that happens, then Israel is free to cleanse Gaza, go into the West. All eyes are going to be off Israel. I think that's a big reason why. But they need the U.S. for that. I mean, they want to expand into Lebanon, southern Lebanon, and Syria. They're just completely out of control, the Israelis. So I think there's a risk.
And just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but how do you think the American public is going to react? Because I think that there was an absolute miscalculation after October 7th. The American public opinion did not go the way Israelis thought it was going to go. Quite
Mm.
frankly, it went in a completely different direction to me, too. Who would have thought you would see basically millions of people in the United States have marched in support of Palestinian rights
Mm.
since in this past year? That's never happened before. So if this conflict widens, what do you think Americans are going to say?
Well, I think the instinct is to oppose it, but the risk is that Iranian missiles could really do some damage to U.S. bases in the Middle East,
Mm.
especially in Iraq and Syria. They're basically like sitting ducks, the U.S. troops that are there. So if we see heavy U.S. casualties, people might be able to get whipped up to support a war. And the thing is, most people don't pay attention to this stuff until things really escalate. So I think right now, again, it seems like Iran's kind of cooled down on the rhetoric. They might not actually launch their attack on Israel, but there's a chance that if they do, and they think it's going to really escalate, that they're just going to go all out and really launch a big attack that they know. And if they think that that means war with the U.S., that means they might launch some strikes against the U.S. bases, in the attack. So there's that risk, but again, it seems like they've cooled down a bit. So I'm hoping that they leave it as it is. But right now, actually, in the past 2 days, the U.S. has been bombing Syria, has been bombing the Shia militias in Syria. They've killed a few of them in response to, they said there was attacks on U.S. bases. So the situation is very tense over there right now. So there's definitely the risk.
Quite fluid. Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, their news editor, and of course, host of his own podcast, Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp. And just what is the word that you like to leave us with as we're watching? I mean, I think you and I both have whiplash as we're looking at these appointments. Well, the people who are being proposed, Matt Gaetz, Attorney General, Elise Stefanik, UN Ambassador. I mean, the Warhawks, I mean, the absolute right wing of the party. And people can surprise you, but I don't expect to be surprised. And elections, everybody have consequences, and this is what we're seeing. What is our takeaway?
Well, our takeaway.
It's hard to have one, I know.
Yeah, I'm trying to end on a positive note.
Well,
But
you know what? I think. Well, let me say this.
mhm,
I think what's good about this time is crisis creates opportunity. I mean, I think what we have to do is be honest with people, and what people have to understand is that last Tuesday, because we were in voting season, that is the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. Now's the time for you to get in touch with the people who have been elected, whether you voted for them or not, and let them know how you feel about war and peace. Now's the
mhm,
time for that. You
yeah.
let them know what you think about the Attorney General pick, the United Nations pick. It is not over.
Mhm.
You're really at the beginning of the process. Dave DeCamp.
Well, Matt Gaetz follows me and antiwar.com on Twitter, so maybe we
Mhm.
could try to influence him.
But
But again,
I wouldn't write that off. I wouldn't.
yeah, no, that's one thing. I mean, the transition team, again, Trump tried to appeal to people who listen to podcasts, and there's a lot of people who have influence who are, I think when it comes to the war in Ukraine, there is a good chance of that ending. I still think that's possible, even with these hawks. So let's hope for that and pressure them for that, because that's the real risk of nuclear war there.
Okay.
So
Well,
that's the thing I think we should be loud about. And of course, the atrocities in Gaza and everything as well. But I think the one thing that has a chance of ending is the war in Ukraine.
well, I tell you, I'm heartened by the fact that Matt Gaetz follows you. And well, I can tell you this, just given someone who's been a pundit on Fox News for years, um, you never know. I mean, you might not always agree with people. You don't have to do that. But you want to keep the door open for dialogue, and the fact is, this is the administration that the majority rules, and they are going into power. But you still have power. You do. You need to let your legislators on the federal and state levels know what it is that you want. It doesn't end at the ballot box, everybody. It begins there. So please get out there and support antiwar.com and listen to the podcast. Become a subscriber, antiwarnews.com, antiwar news with Dave DeCamp. You need to, half your money's going there, everybody. So, I mean, look, follow the money. This is what it is. Dave DeCamp, my love to you and your family. Coming up, we've got Norman Solomon as we do this Democratic, they're saying it's a Democratic autopsy. That's what they're calling it. Well, the body is not dead, but there are signs of illness. Let's put it that way. And so let's talk about it. Let's talk about what happened last week. That is now, we're seeing the manifestations of it this week as we're watching this new administration go in. Many people are saying that the people were not listened to. And that was the crucial mistake that the Democrats made. What do you think? Please, the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show starts in just a few minutes. Blessings to you. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. See you in just a moment.